Chapter 8. Eiji had never stunk so badly in all his life. He hadn't known the way the smell of fish could settle into clothes, hair, even skin. It was so deep in his nostrils that he couldn't smell anything else. He could even taste it. By the time he and Norio had finished with the 2 great barrels of fish the penitent Lord Cloelia had delivered, he was sure that he'd never be able to smell anything else again. As soon as the last fish was cleaned and the great reeking collection of their innards carted off for the handful of pigs kept down in the hole, Eiji went to Zenji. "May I leave now?" he asked urgently. "I came early. Ask Rokuro." The older man narrowed his eyes. "You said you could stay for the supper delivery." "Who wants their food delivered by me when I smell like this?" Eiji pleaded. "I'll put them all off their meals." "They'll live. You can't just come and go whenever you feel like it. Why would I even bother having a schedule if I were going to allow that?" "Please, sir." Eiji hated the desperation he was allowing into his voice. He'd been trained to beg and grovel for gods, not other humans. "I need to get cleaned up before Lord Felix returns. I don't want to appear before him like this." "I've known your master for 20 years, Zenji replied. "I can assure you that he won't care." "Anyone would care. I stink, sir." "It won't be the last time. Work is dirty." "I know, but—" Eiji cast about for some way, any way to explain without revealing the kiss. "Today is important. My lord left a note, and he wants to speak with me. It's bound to be important. I want to be ready when he returns. I want to be good." The last sentence slipped out before he could stop it. He knew he'd revealed too much when the lines around Zenji's mouth and eyes softened. "I've heard that you were Lord Antony's," the older man said, startling Eiji. "What did that have to do with anything?" "Yes," he said hesitantly. Zenji huffed out an aggravated breath and turned to go back to his work, which at the moment consisted of loading the supper plates onto carts. "Only this once," he said. Eiji barely managed to stand still long enough to say, "Thank you," before bolting out the door. He didn't quite run. That would have been disruptive and ill-mannered, but he walked as quickly as his long legs would carry him. It would all be fine. He should have plenty of time to change his clothes and scrub the scent out of his hair and skin. There was no need to panic. His heart started to slow to a more rhythmic pace despite his scurrying. It was going to be all right. He almost careened right past Lord Felix without noticing him. "Oh, Eiji, hello!" Eji's pulse started thrashing through his veins again. He dropped down in the hallway so quickly that he didn't quite get himself aimed correctly and ended up bowing to the wall next to Lord Felix. My lord," he stammered. "I didn't—" "You're done early?" Lord Felix's voice was strange. Not the way it had been after the battle, but it was a little stuffy, a little rattled. "Yes, my lord." It was a reliable response, and nothing felt reliable right now. Eiji had known he would feel awkward and off-kilter when he saw Lord Felix after the kiss, but this was worse than he could have imagined. Between the public location and his own disgraceful state, he was having trouble taming the chaos of his mind into any kind of order. "Well, I'm off early as well," Lord Felix said with a small, hiccuping laugh. What was making his voice so strange? "I didn't expect— well, no matter. Let's get back to our rooms, shall we?" "Yes, my lord." Eiji got unwillingly to his feet and saw that Lord Felix was already several steps ahead of him and walking on the other side of the hall. Shame swallowed Eiji whole. It was a world away from the way Lord Felix had walked with him before, arm in arm and chatting easily. The god was repulsed. Who wouldn't be? He was reeking and slimed with fish guts. The priests would have fainted dead away if they could see him appearing before his master this way. He was a discredit to the temple and every teacher he'd ever had. Eiji trailed after his master in silent misery. Like the first day, he wished he'd never asked to work in the kitchens. There would certainly be no more kisses. Lord Felix didn't even hold the door for him as he had done on his first day. Eiji knew it was incredibly presumptuous of him. Lord Felix was his god, not his porter. but he felt a little squeeze of disappointment nonetheless. That feeling dissolved into confusion when he shut the door behind him, then turned to see Lord Felix scrubbing at his eyes. "Forgive me," the god said. Eiji had to work to keep his jaw from sagging open when he realized that Lord Felix was crying. "I had hoped to have some time to get myself together before you came back. I hope your day was pleasant?" Eiji knelt where he was and dropped into his bow, half out of propriety and half to hide his astonishment. "I'm well, my lord. Thank you for your gracious concern." "I hope I didn't frighten you with my behavior last night." Lord Felix gave a sigh that seemed to turn into a quickly swallowed sob halfway through. "Sorry, that's ridiculous. Of course I frightened you. I'm very sorry for that." The horrible idea of Lord Felix kneeling down in apology as Lord Cloelia had done sent Eiji babbling, entirely forgetting his rehearsed speeches. "If I was frightened, it was my own doing, my lord," he said. "I was the one who disobeyed. Please don't apologize. You were far more merciful than I deserved." "You didn't mean to do it. Even in that awful state, I could see that you were half asleep." Awful state? Lord Felix had seemed cheerful enough. Eiji remembered his giggling and singing, his pleased sing-song cadences. What had been awful about it? Still, he plunged ahead. He might have botched the first part of his plan, but he could still finish well. "My lord is too kind. Please, punish me as you see fit." Eiji wondered if he would be allowed to clean himself up before his punishment. "Eiji?" The raw agony in his master's voice made it difficult to keep from breaking position to look at his face. Eiji had to work to stay down. "I understand that you are upset about disobeying me, but I would take it as a great personal favor if we could forego any punishment just this once. I don't have the heart for it today." That set Eiji wondering about the god's tears. What could have upset him so much? "As my lord wishes in all things." He should leave it there. It wasn't his place to go poking and prodding among his master's feelings. He was a slave and a source of food, not a friend or confidant. But Lord Felix was taking long, slow breaths, and Eiji recognized the sound because it was the way he always tried to keep his crying quiet. My lord?" Stammering again, unacceptable. "Please forgive me if my intrusiveness offends, but may your servant ask what has distressed you?" He stayed still, his heart pounding wildly at his own boldness. It seemed like an eternity before Lord Felix's quiet voice sounded again. "You are so kind to ask, thank you." The god sighed. "I'm sure you noticed that I was in an excellent mood after all that slaughter. I always am. It takes several hours for that elation to wear off, but it tends to leave me very suddenly. When it does, it's quite overwhelming. It all hits me at once." He didn't seem inclined to say more, but given his positive reaction to being asked, Eiji gathered his courage to speak again. "What hits you, my lord?" he ventured. "Myself, I suppose. I did so many terrible things last night. I killed a great number of people, and I enjoyed it. There's nothing I can do to make any of it right. I'll do it again and enjoy it again, over and over, forever. Even after all these years, I don't know that a person can get used to realizing that about themselves." Eiji remembered Norio's comment about Lord Felix drinking tea and tutting at himself for killing people. The other man had been closer to guessing the god's feelings than Eiji, but this wasn't tutting. This was a deep, bleak misery and hastily swallowed sobs. He thought of all the hymns to Lord Felix that praised his battle prowess and told of great heaps of enemies dead that he would leave behind him. He thought of 1,000 years' worth of battles to defend the borders of Taisha in exchange for sacrifices, for Eiji himself. Was this how his master felt every single time? Eiji had heard the songs and stories, and it had never occurred to him that they might have left out the part where the mighty war god broke down crying. You were sweet to ask, but these aren't your problems. Lord Felix had forced a bright, dismissive note into his voice that made Eiji sadder than he would have expected. I'm sorry to burden you. Please tell me about your day. Please notwithstanding, it was an order. Eiji had his orders. He needed to obey, as he had not done last night. He should... Please, my lord, you haven't burdened me, he whispered, terrified by his own daring. It is a great honor to receive my lord's confidence. Is there any way your servant could offer assistance? There was another long moment of quiet. Eiji was about to crack and start begging forgiveness when Lord Felix spoke. You're kinder than I deserve, Eiji. Let's have that talk we promised each other, shall we? The god sniffed then and added, After some washing up. What a stench! Eiji cringed and felt hot, humiliated tears spring to his eyes. He'd been so fascinated by his master's unhappiness that he'd forgotten his own disgraceful state. He had to work to keep his bow loose instead of curling into himself. Yes, my lord, he managed. Please forgive me for appearing before you in such a state, my lord. I am ashamed. You? Lord Felix's uncharacteristic interruption came in a tone of such surprise that it caught Eiji off guard. No, Eiji, would you please raise your head and look at me? Eiji lifted to his knees, face flaming. The god was standing, not sitting in his usual soft chair, and his clothes were... wet? Yes, and now that Eiji wasn't bent over, breathing only his own smell, he caught the strong, unmistakable scent of... One of the patients threw his bedpan at me, Lord Felix explained. That's what triggered my breakdown, actually. Those are battlefield smells as much as blood. Poor Hayato found me like that, dripping and sobbing, and sent me off for the day. He laughed shakily. What must he be thinking? Eiji couldn't help smiling a little as well at the image. There was something comical about the idea of a war god crying piteously because someone had... A patient, my lord? He asked. Yes, I was in the elder rooms today. May I ask, what are those, my lord? It's where I work most days. Julia has several rooms that she keeps for those who get so old or sick that they need constant care. Some of them have minds that wander, hence the bedpan tossing. Lord Felix huffed out another shaky laugh. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really need to stop malingering and get out of these clothes before you decide that you'd be better off living with the pigs. Eiji departed gratefully to do his own washing up, but his mind was abuzz. He'd never heard about these elder rooms before. If he'd been pressed to say what he thought became of those offerings who outlived their usefulness, well, he'd never wanted to linger on the question before. And Lord Felix worked there. It was bizarre, but at least it made for a few more entries on the list. 21. Lord Felix did not like killing, though he was very good at it. 22. Lord Felix worked in the elder rooms. That was where he went all day. That was how Lord Marcus II chose to spend his time, getting bedpans thrown at him. 23. Lord Felix made no sense. When Eiji was finally scrubbed to his own satisfaction and ventured past his curtain, he found Lord Felix already bathed and seated in his usual chair. The god looked up, smiling at the sound of Eiji's entry, and gestured to the other chair. Bad news. I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to sit and look at me again. It's just for this conversation, I promise. Eiji lowered himself carefully into the chair. My lord's will is never bad news. I am honored to obey. His pulse thrummed, fast and erratic in his ears. He'd spent all day practicing his apology. He'd barely thought about this conversation. What would Lord Felix say? Would he explain that the kiss had been a mistake? Eiji felt that his master would be kind about it, but if anything, that would only make the rejection sting more. Would Lord Felix scold him for his forwardness? That would be more than justified. Eiji had had no business grasping after privileges he hadn't earned. Well, Lord Felix cleared his throat. One of the god's big hands was rubbing at the back of his neck. The other was mirroring those motions on his knee. I made rather a fool of myself last night. I hope... when I kissed you, did I frighten you or disgust you? No, not at all. In his surprise, Eiji dared to glance up at his master's face, which was pinched and nervous. It was wonderful, my lord. Oh, good. Lord Felix's face relaxed, but only a little. I've been afraid that I bullied you into it, took advantage of your fear. My lord, I am entirely at your disposal. Eiji tried to keep his voice steady, but he knew his bewilderment was bleeding through. My body is yours to do with as you please. Well, it pleases me not to do anything you don't want. It would please me if you would... In fact, let's make that a standing order. Look at me, please. When Eiji lifted his eyes, they were snared immediately on the intensity of Lord Felix's gaze. The god's eyes were red-rimmed, but as dark and attentive as ever, and his voice was even softer than usual as he spoke. If I ask to touch you and you don't want it, you are under orders to say as much. I ask because I want to know the truth. Eiji nodded, though he couldn't imagine a scenario in which he wouldn't welcome his master's touch. Yes, my lord. Good, thank you. Lord Felix sat back in his own chair, but he kept his eyes on Eiji's. His face tensed a little as he spoke again. Will you please tell me what you felt when I kissed you? Surprise, Eiji said. It was impossible to lie, pinned under that thoughtful gaze. I had meant to offer my mouth for, other service. Lord Felix ducked his head. Ah, yes, I had realized as much. Later, as I said, I made a fool of myself. Please, my lord. Damn, Eiji hated this. It was so much harder to gather his courage when he wasn't allowed to kneel. Please, you didn't make a fool of yourself. You were very good to me last night. I deserved punishment for my disobedience, but you gave me mercy instead. And the kiss was... I liked it very much, my lord. He was faltering and stammering like a child. The priest would have despaired of him. It was very gentle, he sputtered. You are always very gentle, my lord. It's better than I deserve. I don't understand why my lord would wish to kiss me, but I am very grateful, and I understand if it won't happen again, but... He stopped himself finally. What was he saying? I understand? Why had he implied that his master should want or need his understanding? He was meant to obey, not understand. He was overstepping terribly. He was going to be punished after all. He was going to be sent away, and he would never see Lord Felix again until he was old and addled and throwing bedpans at him, and... Eiji? His master's voice was gentle and soft and a little astonished. Surely you know I'm absolutely smitten with you.